Mr. President, someday, 100 years from now, a family will camp on a mesa in Utah, or a hillside in North Carolina, or a canyon in New Mexico, or they'll hike the rocky coast of Maine. They'll play on a ball field in Kansas, and it will be because of the work that we're going to do this week in this Congress. They won't know King or Daines or Alexander or Portman or Warner, Manchin or Gardner or all the others that are going to support our efforts. Our names will be long forgotten, but what we do will be benefiting this country for generations. There are very few things we can do in our work here that are permanent. Bills can be repealed, programs can be amended, times change, and all can change with it. But what we are talking about this week in the Great American Outdoors Act is making a gift to our fellow Americans. Setting aside special places, setting aside opportunities for outdoors and recreation is a sacred trust, and it's one that goes back to the beginning of this country. As I say, there's very little that we can do that's permanent, but this is one of those things. It's the right thing to do, but it also makes sense from the economy's point of view in all of our states. Acadia National Park in Maine generates more than $300 million a year in economic activity in the surrounding communities. Our new Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument is already generating economic activity in the area where it is located. A visit to Maine to see the seacoast and the forest at those two sites would be rewarding for any family. And what we're doing today will enable families to continue to make these kinds of journeys, the next generation and the next and the next. That family will see a sunrise on the coast of Maine, a sunset on a mesa in Arizona. They won't know who it was, but they will know what we did. In Maine, there's a wonderful mountain, Mount Katahdin, the highest point in the state. And it was proposed to be set aside for the people of Maine by the governor named Percival Baxter in the 1920s, one of my predecessors. The legislature of Maine said, no, we don't have to do that. We shouldn't really do that. Who's going to pay for the roads? We're going to take property out of the tax base. What about the trees? There were all kinds of reasons for not doing it. So it didn't happen. It didn't happen while Percival Baxter was governor, but he dedicated the rest of his life to making it happen. Individually, privately, he purchased small parcels of land to assemble what is now Baxter State Park, one of the gems in this country that contains at its center Mount Katahdin. He did this. It's one of the greatest acts of private philanthropy in the history of the United States. It was the legacy of a lifetime. Few of us will have an opportunity to do what Baxter did, but we have that opportunity now. Where does the money come from? It comes from the people in the sense of revenues from the use of federal lands for mineral extraction. This is an idea that was brought forth in 1965 when the Land and Water Conservation Fund was created. And the idea was we're using the public's resources and assets, and therefore the money that flows from that should go back to the people and should go back into conservation. It's a beautifully symmetrical idea. The problem is that the fund that was created in 1965 has been systematically looted by the Congresses in successive years. There have only been 2 years since then that it's been fully funded with the funds that are available. Today, this week, we're going to correct that historic error and make a commitment not only to the people of the United States today, but to people that we don't even know, the children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren of today's citizens. The other thing that this bill will do is begin to fund the backlog of maintenance at our National Parks, Bureau of Public Lands, and other public lands across the country. This sounds pretty boring, pretty mundane. And some of my friends are going to say, well, you can't do this. We're going to raise a budget point of order. Because this is money that, again, it's coming from excess funds in the generation of minerals, oil and gas. But they're going to say, no, you can't do that. Mr. President, what we're doing here is paying a debt. Deferred maintenance is a debt. When I was governor, I used to go to New York to kiss the ring of the rating agencies and hope and beg that they would give us a high bond rating so that our interest costs for our state debt would be low. And at one point, I was making a presentation about how prudent Maine was. We didn't have much debt. We paid it off in 10 years, and we really need this high bond rating. And one of the analysts stopped me, and he said, Governor, don't forget, if you're not fixing your infrastructure, if you're not maintaining your infrastructure, that's debt. Just as sure as if you borrow money from the bank. And it's debt that's going to have to be paid, and it's going to have to be paid in the future, which means it's going to cost more. I had never thought of it that way before. But that's what we're doing here, and that's why what we're doing here is eminently fiscally responsible, because we're paying off a debt. And we're preserving these wonderful, incredible places for people to visit and enjoy. And believe me, after this spring, people really want to get outdoors. In Maine, for example, Acadia National Park has more than 3.5 million visitors a year. That's a big number. It's a really big number when you realize it's more than twice the population of our whole state. Comes to visit this one small, beautiful, incredible spot on the coast of Maine on Mount Desert Island. So what we're talking about today is paying a debt and making a contribution to the well-being of the American people for generations to come. When Baxter completed the acquisition of Katahdin and the area that is now Baxter State Park, he had an amazing quote that I think applies to what we're talking about today. He said, "Man is born to die. His works are short-lived. Buildings crumble, monuments decay, and wealth vanishes. But Katahdin in all its glory will forever be the mountain of the people of Maine. Areas across our country in all their glory will forever be part of the legacy for the people of America." Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.